Well, I'll start first. My name is Jen Carlier. I'm the Director of Faith and Finance here, as well as a Louisville postdoc, teaching ethics primarily. I would love to hear from our panelists who you are, and I'm just so grateful that you're all here. So if you would just introduce yourselves, that would be wonderful.
I guess I can start. So my name is Marielle Thomas. I am the Director of Career Services here at Candler. Have been here since September. So still relatively new to the Candler ecosystem, but very excited to be a part of this community. And so my job primarily is to help students with career and vocational discernment, strategy, all of the above. So it is an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
I will go next. Good morning, good afternoon, rather, everyone. Hope you're well. I'm Kevin Muriel. I have the joy of serving as the director of the Black Methodist Seminarians program and assistant professor in the practice of practical theology there at Candler. I am a Candler alum, and I currently serve Cascade United Methodist Church here in Atlanta, Georgia, as senior pastor. I've been in this role for 6 years. And love it. We just launched our second campus in Midtown. And so we now have 2 campuses, and one in Southwest Atlanta, and now one in Midtown after a successful merger of the Grace Church of Atlanta into Cascade just last year. And so I enjoy these types of settings where we can come and learn together, but I love ministry. And I'm excited about being a pastor in this world where there's so many different opportunities to reach more people. And so glad to be here with you today.
Thank you.
Okay, I can go next. My name is Blanca Flay. I am actually not in ministry. I'm an oncology nurse. My clinical background is bone marrow transplant, transfusion medicine. I was a critical care nurse for a lot of years. And I have my master's degree in health informatics and health information management. And I, with that degree, decided to move out of the clinical setting. And I'm now a clinical nurse educator and medical affairs informaticist for a small pharmaceutical company. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. So if I look a little vague or rattled, I apologize. I'm not a morning person, and it's still morning for me. And I think that's about it for my part.
Thank you. I'm not a morning person either. Pastor Haskell, we're just introducing ourselves. If you would mind just introducing yourself, that would be wonderful.
I'll be glad to. I'm glad to find y'all. I went on the link that was in the calendar invite, and I'm just sitting there by myself looking around.
Oh, no.
So thank you for getting me in the right place.
Excellent.
I'm Jim Haskell. I'm starting my 48th year of ministry this year. So I'm trying to figure it out still. I'm pastor of Bridgepoint Church, Toco Hills, which is right around the corner from Emory and Candler, and love ministry, love people, and have been involved in these kinds of seminars talking about this topic now about 4 or 5 times. So it's fun talking to novice ministers as they're jumping into ministry about sensitive topics like this, but also seasoned ministers as they're trying to figure out how to do this thing, like how to support my family in the right way with people that are on committees that are trying to make sure that the church can afford, the people that can help serve them. So it's always a real difficult process, and everybody's under tension, especially these days, because most churches don't have the money to do what they want to do, and families are under stress and all of that. So thanks again for asking me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm glad you found us. So to start us off, I wanted to ask our panelists, is it always appropriate to negotiate a salary? And how do you know when it is and when it isn't?
So just for the students on the call, just so y'all know, Blaine and I are kind of representing the marketplace. So I'm kind of coming from that corporate perspective. Blaine can come from the public health perspective, and Dr. Muriel and Dr. Haskells are going to come from the ministry perspective. So I just kind of want to be clear on that before I answer.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, sure. So one thing I will say is if a company actually presents a range for a position, there's some leverage there. What I will say, I've had some conversations with some of my recruiter friends, and a lot of corporations are moving more into unbiased hiring, meaning they are removing names from resumes. The only thing they can see are qualifications. And so something that is being communicated to me as far as bigger corporations. So one of the people I talked to was from the Coca-Cola world, and they're over recruiting for the entire space. When I asked him about, negotiations, he was like, well, we don't do that because we practice in non-biased hiring, meaning that we're going to give you the best dollars that we can, and it is competitive. And of course, again, a lot of corporations are moving towards those spaces of trying to not be biased as far as names are concerned, or of ethnicity. And really trying to be fair in the ways in which they are presenting offers to potential employees. So I really think it's going to depend on the actual company. I will say again, if there's a range offered, normally there can be some leverage there for you to have a conversation around that. Now, I will say, make sure that your experience is in alignment with you asking for a higher salary. If you are kind of just entering into the workforce, you kind of have to be mindful of that. Now, we're not doing poverty wages either, right? We still need to have a livable wage, but you still need to be mindful of your education, your background, and your experiences when you're bringing that to the table. So I would say it really depends from the corporate side of house. I'll let the rest of the panelists answer from their expertise.
How many people, how many students do we, or how many participants do we have with us that are actually in ministry? Do you know?
Jim, are you asking
I do
students
not.
or?
Yeah, the students that we're actually talking with today. Are they more corporate, or their ministry, or what do we have?
So it sounded like before the call, we had a little bit of a conversation about this. It sounded like students are applying for all kinds of things
Okay,
because the market is such that it's difficult to find work right now.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me, probably the differentiation between probably myself and Dr. Muriel is that I come more out of the free church tradition, which is going to handle things completely different than the United Methodist Church tradition. I've got 3 uncles that United Methodist Church pastors. 2 of them were DSs, so I'm familiar a little bit with that process, but they make sure and let me know they were not Emory people, they were Duke people. So I guess there is some separation there. They try to explain that to me, and I know the difference in basketball, but I'm not sure about anything else. Okay, so but from the free church tradition, primarily Baptist background, it's a little bit different than working through a DS, a bishop, and that kind of a process, in that the church pretty much acts as an independent search engine, and they go out and look for the leadership that they want. So when they're without a pastor, they put together a committee. They used to call them pulpit committees, and finally they decided they weren't looking for a piece of furniture, they were actually looking for a person. So now they call them pastor search teams or whatever. But they put together a team, and they start to search for a person that they feel like fits their locale, their context, their people. I tell people they actually look for a good preacher, and then they fire guys because they can't lead. They basically look for the things that they don't really evaluate, and the things they evaluate they never really look for. So it's an interesting thing that we've actually got services now and consultants now. I do this with churches when they ask me, that help them ask the right questions. And we can actually help churches in this kind of an issue, not be uncomfortable about it. But a lot of churches still do it on their own. And by the time they learn how to do it, it's over and they never do it again, So they're in the process. They put together a team. They go out and they find prospective people. There's usually websites and friends and denominational people that collect resumes. They get resumes. Somebody's best friend, gives them a resume of some guy that they know, and so anyway, they get a number of resumes and they go through those. They find 3 or 4 people that they think might fit. They contact those people. They set up a time. These days they'll usually do Zoom or something like that. They might actually show up in their services without even telling them, and that's always a comical experience for somebody, as these 7 people you've never seen before nervously try to find ways to sit in your congregation without anybody thinking that they're a pulpit committee, and it's always fun to watch that from the pulpit as they're trying to nervously, find their places of not being conspicuous. But it's these are things pastors talk about. We have fun talking about it, okay? But when you finally get to the place where they narrowed it down to 1 and they're talking to you, then you start to listen to when they want to talk about money. Now, what I found out is the more professional a church is, the more professional that search team is. Okay. The more professional the search team is, the more professional they're going to handle things, and you're going to be able to talk about this kind of stuff a little bit better. The less professional they have, in other words, if you're talking to a church that is more blue collar, more not uneducated as in not having education, but they don't have a lot of people working in upper management or any professional owner type situations. They're operating on a little different level, and you got to be very, very careful about pushing dollars, because they're going to read that totally different. They're going to read that you're not really spiritual, that you don't really care about God's call, that you're just in this for the money, that you're not really somebody that they want to lead to shepherd your church and all of that. So you've got to really have a good ear to really get to know who they are. And you do not bring up money on the first meeting, and maybe not even the second meeting. And you got to listen to, hopefully they mention it at some point. Certainly there's a point down the road that before you ever go in the free church tradition, go in view of a call, and make sure that's not in lieu of a call, but, and you want to go, where you go and preach before the church for them to vote on you. You want to know that you've talked about compensation before you get to that point. Okay, because you don't ever want them to call you as pastor and you don't know what you're going to make. Now, I know guys that have done that. I know people that have gone to that place that they've actually been called as the pastor and still don't know what they're going to pay them. Now, that you've got to make sure it comes up before then, but hopefully way before then that conversation's actually happened. So you've got it really takes an art at that point to know, yes, you've got to talk about it. It might be in a level of negotiation. When is the issue more professional? It can come up. Less professional, you've got to really know and build a relationship with that team before that comes out, so they can see you for who you are and not misread that conversation. Long story, but that's kind of where it is. And every church is different. Every team is different. In the free church tradition, it's every one of them handles the thing differently. So
thank you. So it sounds like in the free church, it sounds like there's kind of always room for negotiation, but when that happens is a tricky thing. I wondered, Reverend Muriel, what is your experience in the UMC?
Yeah, so thanks so much for the question. Great question. I've got a lot of different perspectives to offer but I do think whether it's, from, the corporate arena, nonprofit, or church arena, I always say mostly all things are negotiable with the right people at the table. And I think that's kind of going into the position, recognizing that if people, as an entry level person, even, or someone who has had more experience coming into a new role, if they want you bad enough, if they have seen something in you during the process, then I always say there's room, to an extent for negotiation. I think the other side of that is sometimes you have to be content getting your foot in the door and then growing once you get in. I know for us, when we're hiring, and we've got about 60 or so employees between part-time, full-time, and we're always looking at, the corporate world calls it talent acquisition. Like we're always looking for the best and the brightest to bring onto our team. But as a consequence of that, the market is such that now, if you look at a church, just, specifically through a nonprofit lens, we are in competition with the market. And so, companies are paying their employees more. And so I think churches and religious organizations have to also kind of match that. And so to the question, Jen, about the UMC, pretty much our standard is that we have a minimum salary that we are to pay all of our pastors in the conference when they come into the UMC, whether they're local pastors, full-time or part-time, deacons or full-time elders. There's a minimum salary requirement for each church to have a pastor. Depending on where you are on the spectrum of ordination, that will either come with, housing allowance, insurance, all of that. But as an ordained elder and provisional elder and deacons, there is a mandatory minimum that we have, that churches have. So for us, that's kind of where we start. And, as you get in and you bloom where you're planted, then I think you have more leverage for negotiation. One of the things that we did here at Cascade a couple of years back is we put into our yearly process, as we're budgeting, we put in a review process for every person's salary on our staff, and especially our clergy. We start from the top down. So that gives the due diligence of, those who are making those decisions. That gives them a due diligence process. So I always say that if you're in a job and you are negotiating, people are going to want to see what's on record so that you have a position of strength from which to negotiate. One of the senior vice presidents of the Remy Martin Company, he's a member of our church, one of the former senior vice presidents. And he told me this as a point of advice early in my ministry. He said, always negotiate from a position of strength. Always negotiate from a position of strength. It's difficult to negotiate anything if there's not been a record of how it is that you can implement, what you feel like you can bring, to the organization, whether it's a church, corporate or nonprofit. And, to Jim's point, people can say a lot of good things, but more so now, we look for competence, we look for chemistry, we look for character. I mean, those three things. And then we've got to have compassion, and chief among, they're all important, but I want to make sure competence is certainly there. And then people are always asking, is this person going to mesh well with my team? Like, because you can have the most competent, compassionate, person who is the highest of ethical rapport, and they just have no chemistry with the team, and it will completely sink the ship. So in closing, I think, there are a lot of different angles that you can approach negotiation. But I think for me, chief among them as an employer, is this person going to have chemistry with this team?
Yeah, let me second what Dr. Muriel said. I'm actually interviewing somebody today at 4:00 for a position with us. And I don't interview anybody unless I can see they've done something. The best way that I know they can accomplish something is they've accomplished something. Okay. So, wherever you've started, even if it's been in a volunteer place, even if you've had to go somewhere and just say, let me get involved and do something, show me that you've done something, because that's the best indicator that you're going to do something, is that you have done something, and the chemistry thing is huge. Believe me, there's nothing that destroys an organization, and in particular a church, is to get the wrong person mixed in with the right people. And let me just absolutely, and to find that in an interview process, that means that not only you need to be in the interview process, not only does your team need to be in the interview process, but you need to find some way that you can mix them in with your ministry team that are really not hiring, but see how they mix and interact even before you bring them on staff with you.
Yeah, thank you. Blaine, I'm curious, in the more corporate world, is there anything you want to add to what we've talked about so far? Is it always appropriate to negotiate? Sorry,
No, that's okay. I was on mute.
Okay.
I don't know if I mentioned that my degree is actually in informatics. So computers are theoretically my thing. I would say that from my perspective, you have two arenas that are of note here. So one, if you're looking for a chaplaincy in a public health organization, you're very likely going to be in a union environment. So there's only so much negotiating you're going to have. It is generally a step ladder. They'll bring you in at a certain point based on years of experience, and that's it. Every year you get a promotion or a raise, depending on where you are in your steps and annual service. So that's pretty cut and dry. The more corporate side, my perspective is you are valuable. You're new to this degree, but you came into this degree with life experience. You have your personal traits that make you exceptional, and whatever it is that you do it the way no one else does. And this was something that was explained to me, and I kind of scoffed at it for a lot of years. And the older I get, which I'm older than I look, so the more I'm around, the more I realize that yes, there are a lot of people just kind of stumbling through the workplace, and you bring something pretty remarkable because you're focused and driven enough to get through a program like this. So don't discount experience that is outside what you think your area is. I say this to a lot of people because it's true. You may not have done this particular task or built something in ministry at a church, but you did it elsewhere. And that means you have that skill that you can bring forward into something else. So, as far as, speaking to what I think Kevin said about negotiating from a position of strength, you are in a position of strength. Lack of experience in a specific area doesn't mean you have lack of experience totally. And when it comes to negotiating salary, it's a little bit of what everyone has said. I think it's always appropriate. If you're looking nationally, there are states like Colorado that require companies publish a salary. They can't post a position without a published salary. One of the ways we lose equity in salary is the ability to get people to not talk about it, right? They'll try to put policies in a place where employees can't speak to each other about their salaries. So do your due diligence, look at the market, look at websites, talk to people, hook up with them on LinkedIn and talk to them about, what they're doing and what they get. And people will talk to you as long as it's not recorded. They'll usually talk to you and give you some good advice on, what the values are and what to think about. But that piece of chemistry and that piece of values, I think is also something to really think about when it comes to corporate America. I work for a small pharmaceutical company, which I like to call, like the small d demon. When we think about healthcare, we think about, the devil, and it's very often pharmaceuticals that we kind of worry about. But I work with wonderful people. I work with almost exclusively clinical people. I work in medical affairs. I had COVID very badly a couple of years ago. I was out of work for a month. They never asked me to take vacation time, and that was before any of the federal policies came into place protecting that. I mean, where you work doesn't necessarily mean you're working, in that corporate environment that's really, bloodthirsty. So look for that too, and negotiate there. Sometimes that's the value that you're worried about, not necessarily getting that extra 10,000, but you have to have your bare minimum. You have to know what that is.
Thank you. So a question that kind of is a follow-up on that is some companies, when you apply, and you sort of referred to this earlier, they ask you to name the salary that you want. And it sounds like in some states you can figure out what that might be. How do you do it in a place like Atlanta, I think, where it's maybe not as obvious what you should write down for like a particular job?
So I have a trifecta that I tell people. You have to know three things as much as possible. One is your bare minimum. You need to know what you have to have and be honest with yourself. And we're not, as Marielle said, we're not talking poverty level, right? Like, if you've never read Daniel Pink's Drive, I recommend it highly. It's technically a management book, but really what it's talking about is how to motivate people. And the answer is you don't. What you do is you give them enough money that they're not concerned about their lifestyle and their quality of life, not necessarily millions of dollars. So that's the second number. What is the number that you would not have to think about, really worry about money? You could cover all of your bills, take a trip, and, still be able to focus your energy on what you're passionate about, which is your work. So you're not worried about the bare minimums and you're, not worried about the extras. And then the third number, if you can get it, is either the company standard or the market standard. So even if you can't talk to people who work for that company or that agency or whatever, you can talk to somebody in the field and say, what's the basis? And there are websites that you can look that up to some extent. Keep in mind that a lot of states, if you're working for a university-based system or a public-based system, those salaries are published. In Washington, it's 2 years out of date, but you can look up any state employee, including at hospitals, to see what their salary was, to get an idea of what the range is. So somewhere in the middle of those three, somewhere in the center of that triangle is an ideal number to start with if you can. And if they're asking for a number, then I consider that a good thing. It's always very intimidating. But if they're asking you for the number, it's one, they're going to exclude you right away because you're just way off the mark for them. And that's not a bad thing, because you don't want to be jerked around for weeks and weeks of interviews to get to the end of it and find out that there's no way in God's green earth they're going to pay you what you need to live. And you've given them a number where you can negotiate around. So if it's something close, they'll come down, they can come back, if it's something they can deal with or offer you benefits or stock options or whatever, if you're working for a small startup or something. So I think that's pretty much, I could talk forever, but that's the basic answer for how to negotiate in that regard.
Thank you.
I wholeheartedly agree. So there was, if you are staying in the state of Georgia, there is a website called Open Georgia, which is if you are applying for any state job, so I have been in higher education. I worked at Georgia State and Georgia Tech before I got here. So salaries of those employees are listed because we were considered state employees. So you can kind of get an idea of that. If you've been to any of my sessions this semester, I am a big fan of living wage calculators. If you need one, I can help you with that, because that gives you an idea of, okay, what is that minimum number? What do I need to survive? If you're thinking about moving, it helps compare Atlanta's prices as far as housing, as far as utilities. So all of those things, entertainment, it will break all of that down, even down to groceries. So you'll know how much a steak costs in Atlanta versus in Alabama, right? So we really need to know kind of what that minimum number is. And I always tell students, play around with the number, because it's not going to be the same in every state, because the cost of living is different in a lot of states. So you're going to have to do a lot of your homework and research on that. But then there are other resources that are out there that can kind of give you a guide. So if you kind of know, I want to do hospitality work, right? They can tell you, well, the average range of a person in this particular role is this. So that kind of gives you some idea. Some companies are forthcoming and will list out what the salary ranges are for the grade of the job. typically it will be on the HR's website, so Human Resources website, for you to be able to find that. And so that can kind of give you some leverage too. So the biggest thing is to kind of do your homework. You're going to have to do the homework of figuring out, like Blaine said, what is my minimum number? And then utilizing the resources for that, because again, we need a living wage. And then also too, some of y'all are going to do both. So you're going to be bivocational, right? So you're going to be in ministry and you're going to be in marketplace. So now you got to look at that. So if ministry is really what you want to do, but you're like, yeah, that's not going to subsidize my entire household. So what else do I need? And then that helps you figure out, okay, this is the remainder of what I would need in order for me and my family to be okay. So you're just going to have to do the homework. And of course, I'm here as a resource. So if y'all need help with that, I'm always happy to help you.
The one last thing I'll jump on to mention is, if all else fails and you can't connect with somebody to give you an idea what the industry range is, look at the nonprofit range. Look at what the state salary is for something equitable or something, close to, and then jump from there, because I guarantee you that's lower than what they're getting in the marketplace. So if you take that number and add a percentage to that, then that's a place to start too.
Okay, and so if you're in just getting out of school and you haven't had experience in that market, would you then take the lowest of the range or the middle of the range, or like where would you go with? My worry with these things is always that I'm going to lowball it and they're going to offer me less than I could have gotten if I.
That's basically the reality, particularly for women and people of color, right? So I live in the Seattle area. I have a lot of friends that are very highly placed in IT. One of them is the CEO of a security company, and the discussions that I've had with them are eye-opening. So, when I was looking at positions and changing industries from, direct patient care to industry, I would pass over numerous positions because I didn't have all of the qualifications, and they would laugh at me because they apply for everything that they think they might know. Like it's more of a state of mind than a reality situation in a lot of ways. So, changing your personal perspective, I think actually gives you that extra push that you need when you go in to negotiate as well. So, it's not just about, knowing your worth, it's almost believing what your worth could be versus what you have right this minute, because my strength is not always my experience. I have a ton of experience. I'm 46, I've been working since I was 17. Like I have all sorts of customer service, all sorts of everything. My willingness to work and learn in a position and grow is my biggest strength. So if you give me a challenge, I will rise to that challenge. And you can't necessarily define that in a resume. So that's where the negotiation comes in. It is about personality fit very often, in that regard, and go a little bit higher. If it's, I'm not saying, ask for $600,000 a year, but, if you're vacillating between 5,000, take the extra 5. If you're vacillating between 10, take the extra 10. One of the things that you'll learn in industry is that some of the salaries are astronomical. So things that, are a little bit shocking to me when I first started were, the things that people didn't even bat an eyelash at, when they were in industry and had been there for years. So, it doesn't hurt to ask once you have that rapport. So going back to, I think, Dr. Haskell's or Reverend Haskell's statement about personality and, when to negotiate with churches that don't necessarily have that background. I personally think that we have a strange taboo around income. It's a job. The whole purpose of a job is to do something you love and get paid for it so you can pay your bills. So it's a big part of why we work is for the money. So let's have the discussion in a very, matter of fact way. But sometimes it's worth having that relationship first and having found that rapport with the people that you're talking with and connecting with them on a personal level. I have a friend that just negotiated her salary and benefits for a new position as director of nursing at a smaller clinic. And her first interview involved football metaphors, which I would be lost. I'll be honest with you. I have too many brothers. I spent a lot of my life blocking football out of my brain. So in her case, she connected with the director of the the clinic really quickly because they were able to have that immediate rapport. And so even though they couldn't meet her salary because she was coming from Southern California, where salaries are pretty high, and she was moving to Oregon, they were able to give her moving expenses, slightly better benefits, more time off, things that matter to her quality of life. So that's the other thing to think about, I think.
Thank you. So I actually have a question in the chat. So someone had an initial conversation with a company. They were asked to state their salary requirements. They did, but then during the second phase of interviews, the job description and responsibilities almost doubled, and so they actually need to come back to that conversation. How would you bring that up if that happened?
If for me, this is your time. I mean, you've not committed to anything. This is your chance to point that out and to ask, just say, one of the things you learn in nursing, actually, one of my favorite phrases that I teach nursing students is assume compliance. So when you talk to somebody, you just talk to them as if they're going to agree with you. So you start with, I'm really excited, you start with positive validation. And, I'm really excited about these discussions and, getting to know everybody in this position is really exciting. I was reviewing it again just to refresh my memory. And, I realized that there were some pieces that I may not have understood very clearly. So I see that this position requires X, Y, Z and ABC as well now. And this, how does that impact, what the workload is going to look like and what, I should expect as far as workload and quality, People tend to shy away from the words quality of life now because it's become such a buzzword, but just, in that way, I noticed this, because I was looking, because I was interested and I wanted to make sure I understood everything, can you tell me more about that? And that is my favorite phrase in the world. It's actually from motivational interviewing. If you ever have the opportunity to take a class on it, it's worth every part of your life. It will work in relationships. It works everywhere. And it's a very simple, open-ended, tell me more about that. And it puts it on them to explain what the hell just happened.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Muriel, it looked like you might have something to say about that as well.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly agree with what Blaine just noted. But I will also say that oftentimes during the interview process, companies realize that as they are continuing to review certain positions, I know we do this to the church, oh my goodness, we really could use this in that position, and therefore you'll take it down and repost it. Or if you have a second round of interviews, for us, we often like to be, more forthcoming. If my thing is, if a company or those who are interviewing you have the integrity, they'll be forthcoming about, how the job has changed. And so I think that is either a good sign or a bad sign. It's either a green light or a red light as to whether or not you may want to continue down that road. If they did not disclose it, then, sometimes you have to look at that for what it is. The other thing I will say is that, I think when posting a salary, so for us, we post our salary when we've done a salary study. We know what the position is supposed to pay. We normally give a range. There's sometimes we don't give a range, but we have had HR professionals do salary studies before we even post the position. And so I think for companies that, again, are efficient and, want to attract the best, they would have already done the internal work to make sure that they are presenting the best offer for the best person to fill that role. But if you do get, I think, in a situation where, you say, look, I see what you all have posted, this is what it's going to take, then, again, I think that's a very mature conversation to have during the interview process. And we never shy away from those conversations, but we just also realize that there are some people that we will never be able to afford, and you might be one of them. And so, respectfully, we're unable to move forward. And then then that candidate has a decision to make. Like every company, every church, every hiring committee, we know our peak. We know what we're not going to exceed. And so I think sometimes the onus is on the person interviewing to try to get there with as much information as you can.
Two things that come to mind as we've been talking that I think we need to note is that a student that's looking for their first church position is probably not going to be talking to any organization that says organized and set up is what we're talking about, okay? Especially if they're talking about the lead pastor or senior pastor role, all right? Certainly if they're looking at a staff position, yes, that they might be talking to Cascade in a staff role, and it might be organized in such a way like this. But if they're coming out of Candler and they're looking at their first opportunity to be the lead pastor, senior pastor of a church, and it's their first opportunity, they're probably talking to a very disorganized, very mom and pop, situation, and they're not, and it's not going to be as clean as what we're talking about. And they're just going to have to know people, they're just going to have to listen, connect, relate, understand, and just figure out in that process exactly how to say, I know that Pastor Jones, who was there for 47 years, made this much because you've told me what he made. But, his salary, isn't going to cover what my family needs. And I know that you want your pastor not to have to be out there, not being able to provide for his family, you don't want in the community, that to happen. I know you want your pastor to be able to live in the community, and you understand in the urban setting these days, Pastor Jones might have owned his house, and now you're asking a new person to come in, and the cost of living in that urban setting is now going to be extremely more expensive than what the last pastor paid for. And there's just going to have to be that discussion. But you're going to have to build a relationship to just talk to some friends that you've made about that discussion. And you just got to, don't be uptight about it. Don't get upset about it. Don't worry about it, because you don't have to go, and you can't go if you can't afford. The last thing you need to do is take a position in a church that you can't live on that position. Okay. Now, more and more, in a lot of churches, even a lot of churches that at one time had full-time senior pastors, more and more bivocational situations are presenting themselves, especially in the urban areas. I led church planting for North American Mission Board in Atlanta for over 8 years, helping young guys come into urban areas to start churches, because so many churches had gone away. They had sold their property to townhome developers and everything. And what we had to do, we started them out thinking bivocational, and realizing that might be the only way they will ever be. Some of them were able to build their church up to the point where they were not bivocational. Some are still bivocational. And these are options you just have to think about coming out of school. And maybe one day it won't be. And maybe you can start off with it not being, that way. But you just have to understand the old stereotypical, I get out of school, the church calls me, I'm a full-time person taking care of my family in the traditional way. There's a lot of different ways that you might have to go these days. Let me just, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All of you at different times have mentioned some other things that you can negotiate besides base salary. So I'm just curious, what are those other things that people should think about negotiating?
I'll speak from our perspective. Housing is always, something that is negotiable. In terms of benefits, in terms of time off, I think Blaine mentioned some of these a minute ago. We try to get creative, right? I think when you're trying to match quality of life as an employer with also the needs of the organization, i.e., in my case, the needs of the church, there are a couple of things like I want people to work just as hard as I do. I mean, I think that's kind of you go into it, and I don't know if it ever happens, but certainly no employer is like thinking, hey, people are going to outwork me. But then on the other side of that, you want people around you who can complement you. And so I think and I wanted to say this a minute ago, but one of the things that we moved to recently was experiential interviews. And so they'll sit with so we hired an HR director, and matter of fact, that would have been my first hire. If I'm an employer, when I came to the church, that would have been my very first hire instead of an executive director. But, you know, I was able to get both at some point. But to have someone to handle all of your human resources and to be that point person, so to take it out of your hands if ever you go into ministry, that's just a, you know, just a tidbit. But knowing that there is someone on the back end that's working through those. So before, you know, the top 3 candidates get to my desk, they've already been vetted through an interview process, and they know my standards. And so, you know, I'm very clear that we have to be equitable in, you know, our hiring. And so if we notice that, you know, in terms of salary, and also, you know, how we've looked at it is I want to make sure that women are paid, you know, the equivalent to, if not higher than, you know, the men on our staff. And I want to make sure that we're having equitable conversations around, you know, hiring practices. That has not always been the case in the church, as we know. And so I think we've done a pretty good job about regarding that. But once you get through that first round, you know, we've set up even more rounds of interviews so that we can put, to the best of our ability, the person interviewing into the experience of the life of an employee here at Cascade. And so I'll just give you a quick example. Two of our most important positions we recently hired, my senior executive assistant, who works closest with me and my family, you know, she's been here a year now, and we probably took her on 6 interviews, you know, from the time she was vetted to, you know, how are you going to be around my kids? Are you going to be around my, like, you know, I want you to go do dinner with my wife. I want to make sure that, you know, the staff can vibe. We have an executive board of leaders that we're all. And so I knew that by the end of that process, like, okay, you know, I would tell me what mountain I need to move to get you here, because, you know, I can see that you're going to be that important. Our director of security, the same thing, but we put him through a different set of interviews because he's going to be, you know, dealing with a different set of constituents. So I say all that to say that there are, when you know who you're bringing on, you know, and they've expressed certain things to you, you know what's negotiable. So if it's not base salary, you know, it may be, oh, wow, I want to, you know, spend more time with my kids. If, you know, I have to take maternity leave, I want to make sure that I have, you know, X number of weeks, or if I want to take paternity leave, I want to make sure I have. So those are the types of things that are negotiable, that we've actually been able to negotiate, and not being able to pay a certain salary, you know, especially on the benefit side, we were able to negotiate. So, you know, I think, I'll stop there.
I think that's really good. One of the things that I will say, for especially going into pastoral ministry, that I would stress to every student to try to negotiate is that you get sabbatical. And honestly, if you can get paid sabbatical, that's even better, because that is such a disconnect that I see on the ministry side of house is, and I'll be very honest and transparent, I don't know if in Black church spaces we do that as well, with giving our pastors sabbatical time to be able to rest and still pay them full salary and let them be able to kind of recharge their batteries. So that would be something. The other thing I would definitely say in any space is professional development. You should not be in a space that is not investing in you. And they should see the value in investing in you. So negotiating, can you be a part of certain organizations, professional organizations? Can you go to certain conferences? Same thing for pastors on your sabbatical. Can you take time and the church pay for you to go to certain conferences to be able to network with other pastors, and just for you to be able to develop and learn and grow? We're all still in that process. So I would definitely say professional development. But then the other thing, with this new climate, that wherever you are can, if depending on what it is, that they can be flexible. Meaning that you can have some remote days, you can take mental health days if you need them. So I would just say, think about what does it take for me to be a whole human being? And bring that to the table. Because reality is I don't turn off my responsibilities just because I come to work, right? I do them in tandem. And so having a space that can be flexible in that is always great. So those are some of my thoughts on that.
A huge negotiable area in ministry is reimbursables. In other words, make sure that if you are visiting the hospital, if you have a trip that's a ministerial trip, that you get mileage that's reimbursed to you. If you have a lunch that you take a church member out, a prospective member out, something to do with church business, that you have a reimbursable plan that's something that you know, and make sure it's the government set up to where they don't just give you money and you have to pay it like it's income, you know, and you have to pay tax on it, but it's something that, you know, you turn in your receipt and, you know, and they pay, you know, they reimburse you back, you know, that process. And that is usually a huge negotiating area that can be, you know, very small or be more adequate at that point. And it helps tremendously because you're going to take that lunch with someone and you're going to go to that hospital, and it's either going to come out of your pocket or, you know, something they can help you with. And if it comes out of your pocket, that's money that you would have had for other things.
Thank you so much. I have a class at 1, so I have to run downstairs. I just want to leave. Thank you all so much for joining and for the work you do and for helping our students here. If you were able to stay for a minute to answer some questions, that would be great. And Marielle is going to take over and finish up. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to leave a little early.
No, you're good. You're good. Blaine, did you have anything to add to the conversation before we pivot?
I don't think so. I know it's well said, so.
Beautiful. To the students that are on, did y'all have any questions before we start to close this out? But I want to ensure that we answer any questions that y'all may have.
Just a few things I've learned in the corporate space. So if you're switching roles, certainly talk about being made whole. Meaning if there's anything that you're leaving on the table there that you won't get, like vested equity or bonuses or 401k matches, whatever, make that part of the new salary offer. And sometimes folks may not be able to do base salary, but they'll do startup bonuses or in the nonprofit or church space, I think, how you get paid is important as well. Whether you get paid as a 1099 person, a W-2 person, a LLC, et cetera, that has a lot to do with your taxes.
That's good. Yeah. Elijah or Cerise, did y'all have any questions for us?
Yes, ma'am. This first of all, thank y'all for your time. This is a question I have as pertains to the world of taxes in the life of the minister, because brother in the ministry brought it to my attention that he read in his book of tax deductions that in the case of the minister, you could write a lot of expenses off as pertains to your ministry, such as gas, even utilities in your house, your office space, things of that nature. Can any of y'all speak to that? Is that true? Do any of y'all have experiences with, tax deductions regarding ministry-related expenses?
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely. To your point, there are certain classifications and deductions, et cetera, that a minister can claim in on their taxes. But I think the major point of advice I will give to any person in ministry is get you an outstanding accountant and a great tax attorney. Get you those. And if you can't get the attorney, just make sure that you have a good accountant. And go to them and let them, somebody who specializes really in ministry taxes, because as a minister, you are considered self-employed. You are considered self-employed, which means your taxes are calculated significantly different than most people. So make sure that you get you a great accountant to help to walk you through. And then the laws are changing every year as well. So make sure that you have someone who's conversant in the laws of the state in which you're filing taxes in.
Dr. Muriel, are you not considered employed by the church?
Are you ordained? Are you ordained?
Not yet.
Okay, then or the ordination at this point, Dr. Merrill, I think the ordination is what would set him up as a self-employed, wouldn't it? I think that's in Georgia at least.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
I'm
it may
licensed
be
but
in
not
Georgia,
ordained.
Yeah, I think when you get ordained, you can be set up as self-employed and you can have a housing allowance.
Yes.
Until that happens, you aren't able to have that housing allowance, which is a tremendous tax benefit for you. But you can still get reimbursables, but you can't just automatically take it off. It's got to be something that the church sets up for you, that you turn into the church, that the church reimburses for you. Up until 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you could just go ahead and take it off of your income tax yourself. But there was a change in the tax law that doesn't allow you to do that anymore. So it has to be something set up by the church, and they have something in their budget that's for reimbursables, that you then turn the receipts into them, and then they give you that money back that's been set up, and then that's not taxable to do it that way. But again, I think a good accountant that understands ministerial taxes for sure is something that can help you. And then once you're ordained, then there's a huge change at that point that you need to make sure you get somebody to weigh in with you at that point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question. I just want, before we give the benediction, is there any other questions or thoughts? Perfect. Well, Dr. Muriel, Dr. Haskell, Blaine, thank y'all so much for taking some time out of your day to give us some wisdom and knowledge about the proper ways that we can negotiate our salaries and other things outside of the monetary that we can also negotiate. I am here to help y'all in any way, shape, form, or fashion that you need. That is what I'm here for. So if y'all have questions, feel free to follow up with me. Yeah, and I hope that you all have a beautiful remainder of your day.
It's nice to have met y'all. Thank you for allowing me in. Okay.
Absolutely.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.